CEO of Quorum Control, and we are building an open and permissionless network called Tupelo. Tupelo is a purpose-built for individual objects, or NFTs, and it makes interacting with individual objects for real-world projects a lot easier than a lot of other existing chains. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about a technique that we have been using at Tupelo, which makes NFT verification and checks a lot easier and allows them to move off-chain. So right now, NFTs have rules associated with them. So, and right now, those rules are generally enforced on-chain using smart contracts. For example, we can take CryptoKitties, which we all understand. They can only be bred based on rules. So if you have the Alice kitty, you got the Bob kitty, and they can breed. You take the cattributes from Alice, the cattributes from Bob, and you generate a Carol kitty. Now, those rules are generally baked into smart contracts. Does anyone hear from CryptoKitties? No? Or Harbor? No, okay. I'm grossly simplifying both of their projects, but the point is that we generally have these complex rules for NFTs and what validates them, and they generally happen in smart contracts. For securities, it gets even more complicated, right? So we have a bunch of rules for stock trades. If Alice is going to sell to Bob, then there are tons of rules, especially more and more as time goes on for ICOs. So rules like, is Bob an accredited investor? Has Bob passed his KYC AML? A lot of what happens right now is that the lists are put into smart contracts. That gets really complicated. Other services, such as Harbor, will make calls off-chain to a separate service, which goes through a whole bunch of rules checks, passes back onto chain, and then decides whether or not that transfer can go through. And right now, all of that happens on system, and, and that can get complicated. What we realized that while building Tupelo was that can does not equal matters. What that means is that, in the real world, if I take a piece of paper and I write, 1 million shares of Apple, that doesn't mean I have 1 million shares of Apple, right? I can do that. I can take a crayon and I can write it on a piece of paper, but it doesn't actually mean that I can go to, my stockbroker and say, okay, yeah, just put these on the market, right? But meanwhile, in crypto, we actually spend a bunch of time making sure that bad actors can't actually produce these new assets, and that it's very complicated rules and everything is enforced on-chain and that no one can do anything. What we can do instead is allow people participating in the system, and I'm going to use game loosely because I think even the stock market can be called a game. People who are participating in these communities can be empowered to decide, is this asset valid or not, and not have to decide, can this person have made something bad? It's instead, is this something valid? Is this something worthwhile? Is this something that I want? So what you can do is you can actually take NFTs and embed the rules of the NFT into the NFT itself. And this is something unique to a crypto asset. All NFTs have a way to put some sort of data in there, right? So whether it's a ERC 721, which has the metadata URI. In Tupelo, we use a structure called a chain tree, which allows arbitrary data in there. But the idea is that there's always a place to put immutable data in. And what we can do is use code as that immutable data. And that code will have access to the state of the chain, whichever chain you're using, whether it's Tupelo or Ethereum, something like that. So you could take what I like to think about it as an example is to take a stock certificate. Now, the company can have an NFT in our system. That would be a chain tree. The company can have a chain tree. It can have a list of the stocks it's issued. It can have a list of the stocks it's revoked, because that's an important rule for following regulations for stocks, is that a company needs to be able to reclaim stock certificates. And the company can publish that list, and each individual stock certificate can say, am I valid? And it can check if it's valid by going back to the company and saying, am I in the issued list? Am I not in the revoked list? And that makes me valid or not. Now, the big difference here is that we didn't have to go through the process of minting that stock token through complicated rules and always checking back with the chain, that stock certificate can be created independently with the rules baked in. And then the wallets can actually run the code to say, is this a valid stock certificate or not? So when I am analyzing a stock certificate, my wallet can take that code, pull down the current state of the chain, look at the company and say, is this stock certificate valid or not? And that's a huge change because now individual wallets can look and say, is this something worth having? So if it's a digital collectible, then I can say, did this person just write 1 million shares of Apple? No, they actually followed the rules. Is this a valid CryptoKitty? Did it follow the rules for correct breeding? Did the stock certificate, is the stock certificate non-revoked on the company chain tree? And so this is going to be just a quick little demo here of running on Tupelo. And we'll see if this plays. Right. So we're going to run a issue, which is going to create a company chain tree here. And we're going to issue 5 shares of stock on the chain tree. Those are individual NFTs for each stock certificate. This is a little browser, which is a block browser. And we can see that that stock certificate is valid because no one has revoked it. But now what we're going to do is write to the company chain tree that a individual stock certificate has been revoked. Now, what's important here too is we had nothing to do with the stock certificate itself. We didn't have to have permissions to write to the stock certificate, which can get really complicated. We're only writing to the company chain tree. So we revoked that. We can go back, and in the browser, we can say that this is revoked. And so if I'm looking to buy a stock certificate, I can always go there. I can say, yeah, this is not worth buying. It's been revoked by the chain tree. And it's an important change for scalability and for doing less on-chain and more at the edges of compute, which is really what cryptocurrency and crypto projects really should be doing, is pushing things out to the edges. And so that's kind of the main technique that I'm here to talk about today, which is that we can use trust on the inputs. So we can use the chain for trust of data, and we can lock in the outputs. And by that I mean we can put the stock certificate and who owns it back on the chain as well. But then we can do the actual validations and checks offline in the wallets. And that's something that this kind of idea is what we really push at Tupelo, is how can we make these systems really work for the real world and actually model more real world projects. And I'm going to be at the booth right after this, and I'm happy to talk more about modeling real-world projects or anything along these ideas of interesting new ways to do smart contract-like things without smart contracts. Thank you. And are there any questions? Questions? Oh, one in the back. Sorry, it's dark there. Sure. So the idea is that the more you do on-chain, the more expensive it is, and the more and the harder it is for a project to. Sorry, it gets more. The more you do on-chain, the more expensive it is for a project, and the more the chain has to do, which slows down everything. It makes we all know that there's scalability issues on-chain. The more you can push compute off to the edges, but still trust the results, the faster and more scalable the entire system can be. Anybody else? Yep. So the question was, how does this improve the overall throughput? Is that correct? Yeah. So because that on-chain check and that on-chain transaction doesn't have to be done on-chain, right? So that means that anyone who's checking the wallets and the code for creating the stock certificates, for revoking the stock certificates, all happens out at the edges of the wallet. So you're removing more transactions from chain. The person who is going to do the transaction can validate it before doing the transaction. So they can say, the stock certificate's been revoked, there's no reason for me to buy it. It's the same thing as the crayon for 1 million shares of Apple, right? It's a worthless piece of digital asset at that point. And I think that's my time there. All right, thanks guys.